The training grounds of Outpost Kara 9 stretched beneath twin suns, a vast expanse of red sand and obstacle courses designed to break the weak and forge the strong. Here, under the watchful eyes of the Galactic Coalition's finest instructors, young warriors from a dozen species learned what it meant to serve among the stars. Lieutenant Rhea Solen stood at the edge of the running track, her arms crossed as she observed the latest batch of recruits completing their endurance trials. Her dark skin glistened with sweat under the harsh light, but her expression remained calm, almost serene. She had run this same course at dawn, finishing it in record time before any of the recruits had even awakened. Now she watched, not as a competitor but as a guardian. The Kethran cubs were struggling. That much was obvious. Kethrans were a proud species, wolf-like beings who stood on two legs, their bodies covered in thick fur that ranged from silver to midnight black. They were warriors born, raised in packs where strength determined hierarchy and weakness meant death. Their cubs entered military service young, driven by an ancestral need to prove themselves worthy of their bloodlines. But they were still cubs. And this course was designed for fully grown soldiers. Rhea's eyes tracked one in particular, a small Kethran with fur the color of storm clouds, his legs trembling as he pushed through his fourth lap. The others had already finished, collapsing in heaving masses near the water stations, but this one kept going. Stubbornness, she recognized, or perhaps desperation. Near the observation platform stood Vera, the alpha of the Kethran contingent. He was massive even by his species standards, standing nearly 8 feet tall with fur like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed amber in the sunlight. Scars crisscrossed his arms and chest, each one a story, each one a victory. He watched the struggling cub with an expression that seemed carved from stone. The cub, his name was Rennick, Rhea had learned was on his 5th lap when his legs finally gave out. One moment he was running, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and the next he was collapsing face first into the red sand. He didn't cry out, didn't whimper. He simply fell, his small body going limp as exhaustion claimed him. The other instructors barely glanced up. Failure was part of training. The weak were culled. That was how warriors were made, but Rhea was already moving. She crossed the distance in seconds, her boots kicking up small clouds of red dust. The other recruits watched in silence as the human lieutenant knelt beside the fallen cub. Rennick's chest heaved with shallow breaths, his tongue lolling from his mouth as his body tried desperately to cool itself. His eyes were closed, his consciousness flickering. "Hey, little warrior," Rhea said softly, her voice cutting through the harsh wind. "You did good." She slipped her arms beneath him, one under his shoulders, one under his knees, and lifted. The cub was heavier than he looked, his body dense with muscle even in youth. But Rhea had carried wounded soldiers 3 times his size through hostile terrain. She adjusted her grip and stood, cradling Rennick against her chest. The training ground went silent. Every eye turned toward her. The recruits, the instructors, the officers observing from the command tower. All of them watched as Lieutenant Rhea Solen began to walk. Not toward the medical bay, not toward the extraction point. She walked toward the finish line, carrying the unconscious cub in her arms. Her pace was steady, unhurried. Each step deliberate. The sand crunched beneath her boots and the wind pulled at her short hair, but she didn't falter. Rennick's head rested against her shoulder, his breathing gradually steadying as his body recognized safety. "Lieutenant," one of the Kethran instructors barked, his voice sharp with disapproval. "Protocol dictates." "Protocol can wait," Rhea said without breaking stride. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made the instructor fall silent. "He started this lap. He's going to finish it." Farah moved then, stepping down from the observation platform with slow, measured steps. The other Kethrans immediately lowered their eyes, their bodies instinctively submitting to their alpha's presence. But Vera's attention was fixed entirely on Rhea. She reached the finish line and gently lowered Rennick onto a medical mat that had been hastily prepared. The medics rushed forward, but she held up a hand, making them wait as she adjusted the cub's position, ensuring his airway was clear and his body comfortable. Only then did she step back. Vera approached, his massive frame casting a shadow over both Rhea and the unconscious cub. The tension in the air was palpable. In Kethran culture, weakness was unforgivable. Helping the weak was worse. It was an insult to the natural order, a suggestion that the strong doubted the survival of their species. Rhea turned to face him, meeting his amber eyes without flinching. She was barely 5.5 feet tall, dwarfed by the massive Alpha, but she stood her ground. Her hand didn't move toward her weapon. She simply waited. For a long moment, Vera stared at her. Then his gaze dropped to Renique, to the small cub who had pushed himself beyond his limits, who had refused to quit even as his body failed him, and then Vera did something that made every Kethran on the training ground gasp. He lowered his head. It was a gesture of profound respect among his people, reserved for warriors who had proven themselves beyond question, for heroes who had earned their place in the songs of their ancestors. Alphas bowed to no one, yet here was Vera, the strongest of the strong, bowing his head to a human who stood barely to his chest. "You see what we do not," Vera said, his voice a deep rumble that carried across the silent grounds. "Strength is not only in the body, it is in the heart that refuses to abandon those who fall. The cub failed his body, but not his spirit. And you," his amber eyes lifted to meet hers again, "you honored that spirit. This is a lesson my people have forgotten." Rhea inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words. "With respect, Alphavara, Renique didn't fail anything. He's a cub running a course designed for adults, and he made it through 4.5 laps. That's not failure. That's courage." Vara's lips pulled back slightly, revealing sharp teeth, not in aggression, but in what might have been a smile. "Humans," he said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "You carry your fallen. You fight for those who cannot fight. You see potential where we see only weakness." He turned to address the gathered Kethrans, his voice rising to a commanding roar. "Watch and learn. This is why humans lead the coalition, not because they are the strongest, but because they understand that true strength protects the weak." Renique's eyes fluttered open then, still groggy but aware. He looked up at Rhea with confusion, then at Vara, then back to the human who had carried him. "You didn't have to do that," the cub whispered, his voice hoarse. Rhea knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Yes, I did," she said simply. "Because that's what we do. We don't leave anyone behind. Not ever." As the twin suns began their descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the training grounds, something fundamental shifted in the hearts of those who had witnessed what happened that day. They had seen strength, yes, but not the kind that came from muscle and fang. They had seen the strength that made humanity legendary across the stars. The strength of compassion.